Okay, so we're here on the couch with Appleblim, who co-founded Skull Disco with Shackleton. He put together the most recent Dubstep Allstars compilation, and you may have come across his podcasts for Dub War, Resident Advisor, and Rinse FM. And you will probably have heard some of his records as well, especially for all of you guys that were at the gig on Tuesday. So welcome, Appleblim.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks.
Yeah, so we're all very happy and excited to have you here on the couch. A lot of people here, as we just said, will have heard you play on Tuesday night. That was quite a few people at that gig.
That was a crazy gig, yeah. I think a totally unique venue. Crazy. I think everyone who was there would attest to that.
Mm-hmm. So maybe for anyone who wasn't there, can you paint us a little picture about what happened?
Just many, many people. Crazy semi-outdoor venue, which I believe was built for an expo here sort of a few years ago, which they're still using for sort of these kind of community festivals, which is pretty amazing. And it was free. Yeah, just more people than I've ever seen in one place at any one time, I think, pretty much. So.
It was people as far as you could see in every direction. I mean, many thousands of faces getting heavily into what you were playing. I noticed that you were playing vinyl and CDs. Is that a new move for you?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm kind of a self-employed musician at the moment, and I used to be a bit of a dubplate purist. I don't know if people know what dubplates are, but they're basically one-off acetate records that you cut of your exclusive tunes. But it's quite expensive, and at the moment I can't afford to cut dubplates, so I'm having to learn how to use CDJs, which I was sort of vehemently against in the past, but needs must kind of thing, so hopefully it went okay.
Do you think dubplate purism has been quite a big motor of a lot of creativity, and there's a lot of good things about it? And I think for a lot of international DJs, they're used to playing CDs as well, and the dubplate purism isn't quite as in deep. Do you think there's a benefit to maybe being a bit flexible about it?
I think it can work both ways. Like, I think there's real advantages in terms of, well, the reason that I started cutting was just because every time I went to a dubstep club, that's all I saw people playing. So to me, it felt right to do that when I started to get exclusive tunes. But in terms of, like, I think, well, like my partner Shackleton in Skull Disco could never really DJ, even though he felt like he needed to cut dubs, and he did, and he attempted it, and his music is very percussive, and when you don't mix that kind of stuff very well, you can really hear it, you know. So he's converted to Ableton, and it's completely taken on a totally different thing, and it's amazing, you know. So I think it can, in certain ways it could hold you back, and in certain ways but I think it's the reason that it's good is investing in your tunes, you know. Like, you're not going to spend £30 on cutting things that you haven't got faith in, you know. So it kind of works two ways. But obviously a lot of the, you know, probably the top 10 dubstep DJs still use plates, and I think that's correct. And getting a mastering job on them which has a kind of a sound to it, you know, i.e. one person will be mastering most of your tunes, so it's going to have like a feel of their sound kind of thing, you know. So works both ways, I think, you know. When
you do cut dubs, where do you get
transition?
Your dubs cut?
Like, you know, again, the first times that I went down to Forward, which is like the first dubstep club, you know, like 99% of the things that were played were on plates cut at transition, you know. So I'd just go home and kind of look up, what is this place, you know, and kind of finally get to go down there and meet the guys. And it's kind of, you know, for me, it comes from being obsessed with jungle and drum and bass back in the mid-90s. A place called Music House was kind of the equivalent of what transition is to dubstep, you know. So it was kind of like a dream come true to go down there and get a record mastered, and, you know, like there's people down there that are queuing up and kind of chatting about tunes and swapping things. So it's kind of like a little community thing, you know, which is a really nice thing to be involved in, you know.
Yeah, I can remember back in Jungle days going to interview Ed Rush and Optical, and we went down to the Music House and we were sitting there, and it was kind of like an A to Z of jungle. Plus, I think Danny Rampling walked past, which was kind of slightly unexpected. But yeah, those places are really important, and no doubt when we have Goldie on the couch next week, some of that will be talked about again. But I just wanted to pick up something that you just mentioned. You mentioned Sam Shackleton, your kind of musical partner in Skull Disco, and kind of touched on the way he plays live. Can you tell us what you hear when you go and hear a Shackleton set?
Well, yeah, I mean, it started off that he was just using Ableton to kind of line up his tunes and do a standard kind of DJ set, but he's getting a lot deeper into it and re-editing and composing live, you know, as I'm sure people are aware, like, you know, with Ableton, it's got that potential, you know. So every show that he does is very different, and he feeds off the crowd, and it's kind of like it's a completely different vibe to if he was just sort of playing a few of his tunes kind of thing. So anybody that's seen him or anyone that hasn't, I highly recommend you check him out next time he plays, because it's stunning stuff. Like.
And just again on the DJing tip for a minute, I know that you DJ around and about at the kind of ordinary is probably the wrong word because they're not ordinary places, but the kind of the dubstep places, clubs. Where else have you been DJing recently?
Quite a lot of festivals and stuff this summer. Like Glastonbury is a big deal for me because I used to go when I was young, and I hadn't been there in kind of 10 years, and I got invited to play there this year, which was like brilliant, sort of playing on a kind of outdoor stage and sort of crazy sort of, even one of my old teachers from my degree was there, you know, and sort of like nudging people next to him going like, I used to teach him, like, you know, which is like really nice to know about. Basically the guy that got me through my degree. Yeah, and then Festival like was brilliant as well, which is a festival on the Isle of Wight, which people might have heard of. I like went to Japan last year, which was obviously a big deal kind of thing. So, yeah.
And so when you're DJing now, are you playing some of the new stuff which you've been making?
Yeah. I mean, currently I'm involved in quite a lot of collaborations. I've found that creatively on my own recently, I haven't had the kind of, I don't know if it's like, creative block or just kind of the inspiration to finish things. I find it a lot easier to kind of have someone to bounce ideas off, which, you know, I think what the participants hopefully will find out of this is collaboration is just so much fun, and kind of it can push you into areas that you wouldn't normally go into, you know. So some of the things that I've been happiest with recently are things that I've done with other people, either from Bristol, like a chap called Peverlist, or there's a very young dubstepper called Ramadanman who I've been making stuff with, and a chap in Nottingham called Geom that people might have heard of as well, you know, and they're all things that I've really enjoyed kind of thing, you know. So
can we have a listen to one of these new collaborations?
Yeah, I'll play you the me and Ramadanman thing.
So when did you do this?
Maybe a couple of months ago. It's pretty much finished, but it's quite a long intro, so.
So a reminder then that dubstep's not just about wobblers.
For sure.
So tell us, what is that? So new it doesn't have a name.
Yeah. Unfortunately, if anyone's got any ideas, it's imaginatively titled 140 at the moment, i.e. the BPM. But yeah.
Ramadanman is an interesting person to mention now, because he's someone who's gone in a relatively short period of time from a kind of super fan of the music, someone who's always out, always there, kind of at the very start and there till the end, to someone who's running a successful label, Hessel Audio, putting out some really interesting records. And he's a really good example of that transition that lots of artists go through from fan to creator. But it's something that happens quite a lot in dubstep, and it's definitely your route, isn't it? Yeah,
for sure. I was just very inspired by the club Forward that I went to, just randomly, a friend kind of recommending it to me, kind of late 2002, and it was just one of those kind of like life-changing moments, you know, in the same way of like when you first went out to like a drum and bass rave or a jungle rave or a hardcore rave, you know, just kind of like, what is this, you know, like, and yeah, just got obsessed with it and went every month. It was monthly at the time. I don't know, obviously people may not know the club, like Plastic People in London is kind of like a small club but with a really big sound, you know. So so when you say small, it's like what capacity is, like 200, 250? Yeah, so it's really intimate, and the people who built it have basically got it exactly right, i.e., you know, no glitz, just purely about the sound, and no lights, or kind of no one's down there to kind of check out people dancing or what they're wearing. It's just sort of like it's just the sound, you know. It's all encompassing. So it's a kind of place that, yeah, it was entirely correct for the music, really, you know. So ended up just chatting to the organisers at the ends of the raves and stuff, and you know, that's eventually how I got to know them all, and was asked to sort of help out promoting the music, basically, you know.
So let's just stick around this minute for a moment in 2002, where you walk into Forward for the first time. Can you tell us, like, I just think sometimes getting a picture of those moments is really interesting and useful. So what did you see? What was so fascinating about it for you? Who was there?
Well, for me, I mean, like I said, I've been inspired by raves, you know, 92, 93, and then again going to, like, moving to London in 94 and going to things like Metalheads and just being blown away by sound, you know, almost not being able to, you know, you leave a night and it's like, what on earth did they just do then, you know, like Groove Rider or something down at Metalheads, just kind of like, you know, I don't know what they did to my head for an hour, do you know what I mean? But it's like really enjoyable. It's that same kind of thing of being kind of almost wrong-footed by something, you know, that's so sort of different or you know, like inspiring. So yeah, I mean, my favourite DJ down there at the time was Youngster, who'd be playing a real mixture of anything from grime to kind of breaky stuff to like the beginnings of what people would think of as dubstep now, kind of thing, you know. Just a completely packed room, like electric sort of atmosphere, and for me it was like I'd found out where the rave was again, you know, because I've been going to a lot of kind of electronica type gigs, even around that same area in Shoreditch, and they were just getting drier and drier and less and less people kind of dancing and stuff, and it was just sort of walking into this place was like, right, this is where it's been hiding, kind of thing, you know. So
this is where the spirit of rave has been hiding.
Totally.
I think we definitely want to talk more about Forward and your relationship with that whole family. But I think Skull Disco is one of the things that people know you best for, or certainly that's the thing that kind of propelled you to where you are now. So, yeah, where shall we start with Skull Disco? How about just tell us how it came about?
Yeah, I mean, I used to go raving at Forward with a bunch of friends. I worked at a record shop at the time, and I worked with the best friend of Shackleton. So, and my other best friend in London at the time, we used to go out and rave at Forward and come home afterwards and be inspired and listening to like all the Pirates, Rinse FM, obviously mainly. You know, sort of tuning in every week and getting to know the DJs and texting in, you know, like ridiculous requests and kind of like, you know.
Which is your favourite DJ at the time?
At the time, it's got to be Youngster, really. Do you know what I mean? You know, because he's just like he's technically like amazing and a really funny chap as well, you know. And yeah. So really, Shackleton had been making beats, and I've been mucking around a little bit, but were inspired by going to Forward and hearing this bass music that sort of didn't really have a name then, you know. It was so Shackleton had played me a few things, and it's kind of like, you know, yeah, I think that's okay. And he'd saved up a bit of money, and he was like, I really want to put something out, you know, inspired by what we saw going on down there. And I happened to have just started a degree in music technology, and I'd been given an old PC, and I'd got myself a copy of Fruity Loops because I'd heard that the producers that I loved were using that. So like Scream and Benga and Plastic Man all made their beats on Fruity, and it was kind of like, well, I'll have a go then. And Shaq heard the first thing I did and was like, well, look, let's just do it. Let's just put something out for fun, really, you know. And
whose idea was the name?
That was Shaq. He's a lover of a good pun, you know. So Skull Disco. But yeah. And
Pat, I mean, it'd be really good to have a listen to some of the music you're talking about. Shall we?
Yeah,
Shall we hear something?
A thing that I did on Skull Disco, which is sort of directly inspired by stuff that Scream and Benga were making, sort of early on, kind of thing. So that was just me trying to do something like that, really.
Because you said that you'd read in an interview that Scream and Benga used Fruity Loops, so you got Fruity Loops. How did you get on with it in the first place?
Yeah, I found it pretty easy just to get involved with, and it's kind of still what I use now, and quite a few of my mates still use it, you know. So yeah. Yeah.
It's funny, you do a whole degree of music technology and you're still using Fruity Loop.
Absolutely, yeah. I think,
That says something for the person that invented it.
Yeah, you know, it's like the grime tunes that I loved around the same time as well, you know, like some of my favourite ones were made on like PlayStation and stuff, you know, so I just think it doesn't really matter as long as it sounds good, you know, but I'm sure people will argue with me about that.
So what are we going to listen to?
It's a tune called Girder off the second Skull Disco release.
So how far into your production career were you when you made this?
It's still pretty early days, really. I mean, that was probably the second thing that I kind of finished, you know, so still in the sort of the lucky mixdown kind of period, really, sort of not really knowing what I'm doing, but kind of just trying my best kind of thing.
I mean, a lot of people who've sat on the couch and talked about, you know, what they do and how they do it have talked about how they started by trying to make a record they liked. And that process seems to be quite common. You hear something you like, you go home and you go, oh, I wonder how they did that, and you learn to navigate whatever you're using. Was that the case for you?
Entirely, yeah. It was sort of directly inspired by kind of beats that Scream and Benga were making back then, you know, sort of very raw and stripped down, and you know, the fact that it was Fruity Loops that I heard that what I read in an interview that they made it on, it was kind of like, I think I can probably get into that, you know.
So can we ever listen to something else again, like early days that was directly inspired by something?
Yeah, I mean, like Digital Mystikz, like when they first started getting played down at Forward, was like a massive influence. And again, I was sort of trying to do something a bit like that, but kind of mixed up with. I was a big fan of like Ed Rush and Nico and Trace and stuff like that back in sort of 95, 96, and so it's got a bit of that in there as well.
Heard what you were saying then, but maybe just say it again. What was in there for you that you then took into your tune? By the way, it's slightly rare, that record.
Yeah. I mean, like it's just really sort of strange music, you know. Kind of when Youngster and Hatcher first started playing it, it was kind of threw you off a bit, you know. It did take me a couple of times to kind of stand in there, just like almost getting used to kind of dancing again, like the same way when I first heard sort of jungle or whatever. You're kind of like, you have to kind of think about how you're going to move to it or whatever. But yeah, it was just kind of like the bleeps and the bass and the kind of the rhythmic diversity of it that was sort of quite astounding, I thought, you know, like elements of all my favourite things kind of distilled in a way that I hadn't heard before, you know. So it's definitely just, I wanted to get involved in that, you know.
Now, but you mentioned Metalheads a minute ago, and Mala and Pokes and Loafer all went to Metalheads. Did you know them back then?
No, not at all, no. I mean, I came from a town called Plymouth in the southwest, which had a big rave scene. But like I moved to London in '94, and you know, sort of listening to the radio and stuff like that was mind blowing, and like trying to find out where the raves were, and eventually sort of finding like Blue Note, like Hoxton Square kind of thing, and caught the last couple of those there, and then followed them around religiously for the next kind of 3 or 4 years, really, you know.
But it's funny though, isn't it? There's quite a few people who were all, you know, they were I remember Mallow saying before that they were the first guys into Metalheads and the last to leave. Yeah, you know, they'd be and like queuing up, and there was always some guy who was reading the Times in front of us, and some other dude. But the same was for you. There was a lot of people that seemed to kind of have their first, what would be the word, like subsuming, like totally lost in a scene. That's a very poorly put together sentence. But they kind of had their first sort of musical epiphanies around Metalheads. Yeah. I suppose, I guess you may have you had that conversation with them? Yeah.
You know, you can, I think that's the thing that even with like Code 9 as well, you know, like in the music that you hear them make, there's almost this idea that like they've come out of jungle and drum and bass, but they're not trying to make something that kind of mimics it, you know. It's kind of like, but I feel like you can feel the kind of ghost of that stuff in there, you know, just in the sort of like in the spaces almost between the rhythms, rather than trying to sort of fill them up with everything, you know. So yeah. Yeah, the ghost of jungle, the ghost of rave. You mentioned Ed Rush and Nico, and you may have mentioned Optical or not, I'm not sure. What was it about that No U-Turn stuff that you particularly liked? Just like raw energy, basically. Seeing them play out, like in those days, it was sort of like, it was mad. They sort of seemed to create their tracks to design to be mixed together, you know, and they seem to know the inside and outside of each other's tunes completely. Sort of Ed Rush and Trace back to back, they'd be mixing, and like the aiming would be firing on one deck, and in the space that it isn't, there'd be another one. You know, it was completely linked. And yeah, sort of like reading about their studios and stuff as well. Sort of like Nico and the whole kind of like, you know, someone would be bringing in a fresh tune just as they're mixing down another one and mixing it into what they've just made and then taking it out to get played in the evening. And it was just like, just really, really inspiring, and just that sort of really primal energy kind of thing.
There's always had a very fine line, or kind of good line in titles. You know, Soundboy's ashes get chopped up and snorted. Was that before or after the Keith Richards?
That was actually before. And
do you think he's a secret Skull Disco fan?
I reckon he's been ripping us off.
Tell us a bit about the aesthetic of the label, because obviously, like, the name of the label, the titles, the artwork. I mean, you've got some records down there. You know, let's just
examples that I could sort of
get them out.
Show around. I don't know if anybody wants to.
Here we are. That's what we've got here as well. How important was it for you to have that whole thing? Yeah,
it was massive, really. I mean, learned a lot from it, really. I mean, for the first couple of releases, people were talking more about the artwork than the music, really. Do you know what I mean? Because I think it was probably of a higher standard. Do you know what I mean? Eventually, we started writing stuff that maybe stood up to it, you know. But it's basically, you know, I mean, Shackleton comes from the kind of the sort of punk rock DIY fanzine kind of side of things, so he was always very big on kind of visual things, and a friend of his used to draw things for his old fanzines, and it was sort of made sense when we started the label of getting him involved again. So it's like, it's all one guy, you know, like one of Shackleton's oldest friends who comes up with all the visuals. So it's like, but yeah, it's definitely taught me something about it, you know, like there is something really nice about faceless white labels, I think, you know, like in terms of like a lot of the stuff that I used to buy from grime and dubstep in the early days was just like random pressings of like 500 white labels. You never really knew who it was, or, you know, which is definitely something sort of good about that, but also to identify with something, and especially in the age of kind of like downloads and stuff like that, I think to give people a product that's got something special about it is like really, really important. So I've made sure now that we've finished Skull Disco, like the next thing that I'm doing, I really want it to be presented in a different way, but still with a really strong sort of visual element kind of thing, because I think it's just, people really cherish that, you know, when they buy something, you know.
But Skull Disco, during its lifetime, was a really successful label for you, wasn't it?
Yeah, unexpectedly so, you know. I think Shackleton's music kind of carried it for a certain amount of time, you know, and was distinctive and different enough, and was picked up on by basically like techno DJs, which we never expected to happen at all, you know, who all started kind of pitching it down and putting it in their sets and stuff, you know. So we never expected it to do anything, you know. We were trying hard to flog copies to black market for our first release and stuff, and sort of people were a bit confused by it, you know. What's this weird, looks like a heavy metal record, you know what I mean, like, you know. But gradually, yeah, it's become something that was successful. That's not ever anything that we sort of intended, and now after 10 releases, it's kind of like it's run its course, and it's like, I think to carry on and try and make it work in any kind of way wouldn't be right. It's been a nice chance thing that everything's all worked out, but to try and engineer it again, I don't think would work, you know. So we're kind of doing our own things separately now. Like Shaq's still going to be making music, but it's going to be a different kind of thing, you know. So
can you tell us the story about how you got the Ricardo Villalobos mix to happen?
That was just you know, I just read in magazines that he'd been charting it basically, and we had been booked for Festival for the first time in 2006 it was, and he was playing there as well, and I'd been a fan of his records, but I'd never seen him DJ kind of thing, you know. I'd kind of missed out on him becoming this big sort of big DJ, you know. To me, he was still just a weird experimental kind of techno producer, really, you know.
It's funny how that happens sometimes, isn't it? You think someone's one thing, and the rest of the world has caught onto the fact that it's something completely different.
Totally. So we just went down to check him out, really, and I'd had the foresight to think of bringing along parts for one of the tunes that he'd been playing, and we just kind of like stood down the front and shouted until he sort of noticed us, and like wearing our kind of Skull Disco hoodies and like waving a CD, and sort of eventually kind of looked down and sort of minced over and it's like, looked at me and was like, Shackleton? I was like, no, it's him. It's like, oh, yeah. And mincing about and and just put the CD in his hand and sort of like shouted remix at him, and he's kind of like, oh, put it in his bag, and I thought that's the last we'd hear of it, But 2 weeks later, he gets in touch and says he's done it, So sort of bonkers, really, It was 20 minutes long, and he was telling me that he couldn't make it any shorter, and if I wanted to have a go at changing it in any way, then I was welcome to, So I had the weird opportunity of trying to re-edit this massive 20-minute tune, and I couldn't really do anything with it either. So it was like, look, I think we should just cut it down the middle, stick it on two sides, and just see what happens, kind of thing. And that basically like just saved the label. We were struggling at that point, and we were about to kind of put it to bed after kind of it wasn't even breaking even, kind of thing, And he gave us the remix without even talking about money. It was look, he really liked what we were doing, and it was like a gift to the label, kind of thing, And it went on to sell like nearly 8,000 copies now on vinyl. Do you know what I mean? So it's sort of like shot in the arm for us completely, And then now Shaq has kind of returned the favour by remixing him, So
it's funny though, isn't it? Because I think often from the point of view of like someone that's into music or the person that's going into the record shops, you see these things as sort of fully formed entities, don't you? You don't look at a Skull Disco record and think, well, I better buy this because they might be struggling. You don't have a sense of like what's going on behind the scenes, and it's quite interesting to sort of to see that even the people that have got the labels that are doing things and are really interesting are going through the same trials and tribulations that anyone goes through.
Sure. Yeah.
I really love that story because it's just so fantastically democratic. There's no like we were backstage with him or we were hanging out here. It's like you're literally at the front going, look, it's us.
Yeah.
We are our t-shirts.
He was a really, really like genuine chap, and there were lots of other people kind of sniffing around when they heard about the remix who wanted to release it, and he was just really adamant that it was like, no, this is for you and your label. It's not about anything else. It's literally just like, I want you to carry on doing what you're doing, and if that can help in some way, then all good, kind of thing. So,
I mean, Shackleton has kind of, you can't really use the word publicly because he's so unkeen on being public, but he seems to have a very extreme discomfort around the word dubstep and the kind of connotations of dubstep. Do you think his response is kind of like at the far end of the spectrum, but is reflected by other people within the scene?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, like, in a way, it was sort of, I marketed the label as something that was exploring dubstep and grime and kind of bass music, and at the time that was correct, kind of thing. But I think after it became, oh, this is dubstep, I think, Shaq really lost interest after like a year or so, really, of like these incredible records by like Digital Mystikz and Scream and Banger and stuff like that. He moved on to other things and felt like we'd kind of like been carried along with that stuff, So yeah, I just think he's the kind of guy that isn't in it for attention or kind of being part of any kind of like scene or sort of people saying about the remix being like, oh, this meeting between techno and dubstep and da-da-da. It's like, he didn't really have a clue about any of that stuff, like he wasn't hugely into dubstep at the time, and he doesn't know a lot about techno, So it's kind of like, it's just something that kind of happened, And I think he'd prefer to just sit on his own, make music and put it out, and whoever buys it, and that's it, Whereas I'm a lot more into the whole process of promoting a record, and I read magazines, sort of obsessively, and like to know what people are playing and who's working with who, and I mean, it's two different ways of working, really. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's probably the right time to just sort of go our separate ways and do our own things,
And how do you feel about the internationalisation and expansion of this kind of unwieldy thing we call dubstep?
I mean, it's all good, kind of thing. It's just that I don't know. Like I go out and I hear sort of the big tunes getting played, and then to me it doesn't inspire me as much as like hearing the kind of the really weird fringe stuff, But I think as long as people are happy and dancing, do you know what I mean? It's the same as anything. If people can say like, oh, drum and bass is dead, or it's no longer experimental or whatever, but surely it is. You just need to find it, And if people are still raving and having a good time, then that's what you want, isn't it, basically?
I mean, there's a different energy in some dubstep clubs than there was, say, a year or 18 months ago. Although, having said that, what was there in, say, 2006 was a very different energy to what was there in kind of the days when it was all being developed. How do you feel about that difference?
I mean, when we first started going to Forward, it was less about people raving out and dancing. It was a lot more just kind of people stood listening, you know, which is cool. But we kind of like couldn't not be moved by the music, you know. So we would just kind of go crazy.
And when you say we, who do you mean?
Just me and my crew of people. So me and Shaq and our friends and stuff, you know. And you know, it's really nice to know that the people down there kind of appreciated it as well, because they were sort of like, oh yeah, you know, we remember you lot coming down and going mental and like, you know, like DMZ, you know, eventually kind of asking us to play there and stuff. You know, it's kind of like as a direct thing that it's like we'd kind of inspired them by just being that enthusiastic about the music. So I think that kind of energetic response to music is really, really important. But I think there's a danger of it becoming a bit kind of macho and a bit kind of like, you know, all the big kind of builds and drops and stuff like that, and people having a big kind of mosh and kind of pushing each other around. I'm not into the aggression side of it, you know, but I'm definitely into people letting go and like, you know, really brocking out kind of thing, you know.
Brocking out. What was the last record that you heard out that made you kind of stop and go, oh, what is that? What's it doing? You know, that kind of feeling you get when you hear something and you think, I can't say I like this because it doesn't really make sense to me yet, but I've been alerted to something in it, and I know that once I've figured it out, I'm going to really like it.
Hard to say, really. I mean, around this kind of genre, there's a chap called Jake's actually from Bristol who's just making bonkers stuff, you know, like really, really, really odd. But it still kind of works on the dance floor. They're kind of bangers, you know, but they're really off-kilter, strange, awkward rhythms, which is always going to appeal to me, basically.
Is this a wonky banger?
Well, yeah, perhaps.
Although the word wonky seems to have different connotations. Wonky's being used a lot in lots of different genres, but it's kind of like, it means like you've got your wonky pop electro stuff, you've got wonky in the kind of black down used sense of it. So I feel like wonky is one of those words like trip hop, which means about 15 different things.
Definitely, almost means nothing
eventually kind of like Phoenix-like turn into or become something else.
Yeah.
So where are we? We're talking about you and all the people that you were with at DMZ and that kind of energy. I know, that leads us nicely to Bristol, because the kind of people you're talking about form the sort of Bristol contingent. For people that don't know, Bristol is a small city in the southwest of England that has quite a strong bass bin and reggae heritage as a port. So there was lots of, there's like geographical reasons why it has this, but this is where Massive Attack came from, this is where the Wild Bunch that preceded Massive Attack were from, and where Ronnie Size and all his Represent crew came from. So yeah, aside from my potted history of Bristol, what does Bristol mean to you?
I mean, I studied in Bath, which is not so far from Bristol, you know. So as I was travelling back to London every week, every other week, and going to Forward and stuff like that, we started hearing about someone doing stuff in Bristol, which is a chap called Pinch, who was basically the first person to kind of book any of these Croydon boys, like kind of outside of London, really. So it was kind of the first place where it kind of took hold. So we were just down there at all these early nights when 10, 20 people would turn up, you know.
So you didn't know about it before, you just heard about it and made sure you were there? Yeah.
I mean, we were just surprised that there was something going on in Bristol, because we'd obviously always had to go back to London to check stuff out. And the reason that Pinch started doing it was literally so that he could hear the music more. You know, he came up to Forward once, had a look and was blown away, and then rather than like us coming up all the time, he wanted to bring people down and show people down in the southwest what was going on, you know. So yeah.
And Bristol's become a really important sort of second centre, hasn't it? And obviously that all taps into the kind of the musical DNA of the place. But is there a, I mean, like whatever Bristol sound? Because you can end up just kind of putting labels on things, but maybe from your point of view, what's happening in Bristol? Who are the people that are operating?
I mean, there's such a varied, such varied stuff coming out there that I don't think you could just call it like, one sound, like a Bristol sound. But I think the one thing that people have in common is is not wanting to kind of copy what's going on in London, you know. So it's kind of obviously directly inspired by, but trying to do something a bit different with it, you know. So I mean, you've got people like Forsaken doing something that's really sort of rhythmically sort of diverse and kind of, and obviously sounds quite a lot like kind of old drum and bass or something. But then you've got Headhunter doing like real sort of clean mixed down kind of bangers, and you've got Peverlist doing this strange, slightly slower, almost techno-y kind of thing. And the thing about Bristol, I found, is it's very open to kind of to newcomers and people who are doing something different. You know, it's very sort of inclusive. Whereas I always found London a bit more kind of closed off and kind of cliquey. You know, but they're very keen for people to just get involved down there. You know, so. And
there are some kind of like really new, like young producers coming through as well, aren't there? Like Joker. Yeah, Joker and Jemmy, and there's some really amazing vocalists down there as well. You know, there's like so much potential over the next few years, I think. You know, and like the house that I live in, there's 3 of us that produce, and all these guys that know Joker are coming over and doing vocals for my mates' tracks, and so it's sort of organically moving along really, really nicely, kind of thing. So. No, actually, you're talking about vocals. Do you think that kind of like that sort of with Bristol's heritage and the vocalists and the kind of more soulful element that's kind of from the city, it's going to mean that we're going to be hearing more songs like the Pinch tune that was on his album? Yeah, I definitely hope so. You know, there's a few guys, chap called Shads, that are doing things kind of like kind of R&B soul influenced over the top of kind of like grime or kind of dubstep beats. I think when you get a strong vocal tune in dubstep, it shines out so much because there's so few of them, you know. So you get something like Jar War, like by the Bug remix by Loafer, with like Flowdown on, it just shines out because it's incredible. And there's not many vocal tunes, you know. And you might get the Pinch one with a female vocalist on, or Geom doing a tune with a local girl from Nottingham doing like this sort of soulful, like a song, you know. And it's I think there's got to be like more of that. That's something definitely I'm really interested in. Can we have a listen to something that you've done? You mentioned Peverlist. That's correct pronunciation, isn't it? Yeah. Oh, yeah. It took me quite a long time to get that one right. I think wasn't his original name the Peverlist Hatfield Junglist? Hatfield Peveril Junglist Massive. That's it. Hatfield Peveril Junglist Massive, which is even more of a mouthful. A very small place in Essex. So. Tell us what you're going to play and give us a little bit of context. Who is... he runs Rooted Records, right? Yeah, he was... I mean, one of the things that I used to go to Bristol for the most when I lived in Bath when I was studying was to buy records, and barely anywhere in England even was stocking kind of grime or dubstep. And he was just passionate enough about the music just to kind of like be ringing up the people who made the records and saying, look, can I get 20 cent down here or whatever, you know? So he's got quite a sort of unique position. And obviously it's a real focus for our area, you know, as well, you know. Just got to know him through going to raves and found we had a lot of tastes in common and started doing a few tunes together. So this is a thing called Over Here, which ties in a bit to something that I'm doing on my new label later, which is a remix of it by a house guy called Brendan Muller. So I'll play the original now and then maybe play the remix a bit later. Yeah, please. Thank you very much for that one. Can you tell us, give us an idea about how differently you work now than when you first started? So what's the picture when you were making this, when you two were making this? What was happening? Where were you? Tend to sample a lot of stuff, whereas in the old days I just used to kind of like use whatever was really available on Fruity Loops, really, just like sort of trying to get presets to sound sort of good, basically just by messing them up with effects and stuff, you know. But generally, I'll just start by just sampling tons and tons of different stuff these days, which is one of the fun things working with Ramadanman as well. Like, it's something that he's not really done too much in the past. He's very much just kind of uses what's around with like synths and stuff. But I like to try and create things that are unique, basically, you know. So, you know, just sample from just the strangest places that you can and try and make different sounds out of, you know, like it might be strings or guitars or anything, but end up sounding nothing like that kind of thing, you know. So that's kind of how we started with these things, is just sampling just crazy stuff, really, and just trying to make our own unique sounds out of it, you know. So what specifically crazy stuff are you talking about?
Could be anything, you know. Like I'm just a real like record collector kind of thing, you know, just because I worked in a second-hand record shop for years and years and years. So like, you know, progressive rock, you know, like just things that you think no one would have heard, you know, anyway, or just even really common stuff, and just try and make it sound really different. I just really enjoy the sort of challenge of working with sounds and trying to make them different to how they first were, you know.
And any like apart from sampling, like more sort of music-based stuff or effect or like sound, making your own sound type stuff.
Yeah. Generally trying to get a bit more into synthesis. I mean, like I said, I did a degree in music technology, which gave you a kind of a basic grounding in these things, you know. I mean, that's been the fun thing about getting to have a go on the Junos and so on upstairs, you know, which is something that working with a chap called Gion from Nottingham, who's got a lot of old analog synths, and it's just so fun to get hands-on with those things. And I think, you know, for me it's much quicker to get a sound that I like out of those than messing around with a mouse basically on a flat screen kind of thing. It just seems so much more kind of real and fun playing with an old synth like that, you know. So definitely something that I want to try and invest in sort of soon.
I mean, Giom's another interesting artist, isn't he, with a pretty broad sound from the more kind of electronic-y stuff he does on his own label to tunes like Reminiscing, which is it's kind of a soulful vocal track. And you were one of the first people to play that as well, weren't you?
Yeah.
So what's it like around Giom's house then? Because I know you've been working together, you mentioned before. What's it like around his house, and what's the picture of where he is with all these synths?
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously like a collector of those kind of things, back from the kind of electronica days, really, because he had music out on like Scam Records, which was obviously you know, heavily to do with Autechre and Gescom and people like that, you know. So he comes from this kind of melodic, kind of synthy kind of background. But it's just really inspiring to step into someone else's space and see how they sort of do things, you know. So he's got a very sort of unique way of working with those things, and I found it instantly kind of inspiring, and we came up with some really good ideas really quickly kind of thing, you know. So
unique how?
Just I guess everyone's got their own little tricks of the trade, haven't they, you know, and he just happens to have his own sort of ways of doing things, like I'm sure everybody does, you know, but things that I hadn't seen sort of done before, and just a really sort of quick and effective way of working with a setup that's his, you know, because he's obviously got used to it over so many years kind of thing, you know.
And have you got any other new collaborations that you can play us?
I've got something which
just collaborations
could tie in with an inspiration on Skull Disco, which is the rhythm and sound kind of axis from Berlin, who worked with a vocalist called Tiki Man, which I'm sure some people will have heard of, who's one of my favourite vocalists. So I could play you a snippet of something they did together, sort of in the kind of mid to late 90s, and then been lucky enough to be asked to remix something with his vocals on, basically, which is sort of like a dream come true. So I could play you a bit of that as well.
So tell us, what are the this and the that we're listening to exactly?
The next thing that we're listening to is Rhythm and Sound featuring Tiki Man, called Never Tell You, on a label called Burial Mix, which is a label that myself and Shackleton were kind of obsessed with, basically, you know, the kind of that we bonded over, you know, and so to end up working with those kind of people is just like, is crazy, really. But I'll play you a bit of that.
That's not sounding so rough to me.
Fingers crossed.
So what's happening with that then?
That's actually going to come out on a label called Simple, which is run by a chap called Will Saul that I've just been hooking up with recently. The original's by a chap called Sideshow, who normally records for Ninja Tune as Fink, but does this kind of like, it's really, really varied kind of stuff. And was a big fan of Tiki Man, got in touch with him and got an exclusive vocal off him. So to be able to work with something like that was just a joy, really, you know, like really well recorded and really original kind of soulful kind of reggae vocal, you know. So
too right. It's interesting though, isn't it, how that kind of the sonic aesthetic that underpinned all the dubstep stuff really can actually so easily be transported onto like a different framework and make it make sense and kind of really show something that you weren't expecting in the kind of genre it
we didn't really know what to do with that, because it's like it's 138 beats a minute kind of thing. So we thought, well, we'll stick to that because the original is, and you know, we've done something kind of 4/4, which that's kind of quite fast for that. But you know, it's sort of, hopefully it still works, you know, and the label were really happy with it, so it's all going ahead. And we've also, me and Ramadanman have made a house tune that will be coming out on another label related to that, you know, which is, yeah, sort of quite interesting as well, you know, just trying to keep doing different stuff around the kind of edges.
And yeah, different stuff around the edges of a fertile place. While we have Tiki Man kind of in our psychic space, can you tell us a bit about, because you're kind of in there tight with all the Hardwax crew now, aren't you? How did that happen?
That was literally just, we got booked to play in Berlin a few years ago, and were invited to come along to the shop and just have a chat with them. And I'd been chatting to the shop anyway, just in my sort of role as trying to promote music to people when I was working for like Temper Recordings. So I'd actually sort of randomly chatted to this guy, you know, Torsten at Hardwax, which I didn't realise was you know, the producer of some of my favourite kind of records from, you know, 10 years previously kind of thing. On
which records are you talking about specifically?
A label called Chain Reaction, which was came out of the whole Basic Channel kind of camp. It was kind of the next generation below them, sort of kids who were inspired by them, around the shop and around the kind of the mastering house that is related to them, called Dubplates and Mastering. So yeah, just through randomly chatting to this guy, through talking about records and you know, the fact that they were really liking Temper stuff and selling a lot of it, and I'd send them special stuff and generally striking up a good relationship with them. I was kind of like, oh, have you heard of this guy T++ that I was kind of hearing some really interesting stuff by? And he's like, oh, you do realise this is me? And I was like, oh, right, okay. And it's like, well, shit, so if you're T++, that means you must have been Resilient and Erosion and various artists, which were these people on Chain Reaction, which was all him. So it's really amazing. These are tunes that completely blew my mind, sort of in sort of '97, and to end up kind of like you know, in touch with them, and I'm releasing stuff by him, and we're kind of working together on stuff. So it's like we just got invited to the shop and to the mastering house, and I cut dubs there, and you know, we kind of met all the gang, and they're just really positive music people kind of thing, you know, and we were welcomed into the family really, really nicely, you know. Especially they're really big fans of Shackleton, basically, you know, which is quite overwhelming for him, with them being such a big influence on him and stuff, you know. But it's all just natural. Nothing's trying to be forced. We're not going to try and sort of like make too much of it, but it's just sort of like yeah, it's a really wonderful place, and you know, clued up people and passionate music people, basically, you know.
So where else might this relationship be taking you?
We shall see. I mean, they've just started doing dubstep parties at the one of the biggest techno clubs in Berlin, which is called the Berghain, which I'm sure some people will have heard of, which is a legendary kind of gay techno mecca, basically. You know, it's straight friendly, but it's run by gay people, and it gives the whole place a certain vibe, basically, you know, because it's not the kind of place people come in the same way to something like Plastic People, where it's not about coming and picking up chicks or whatever, or, you know, sort of, you know, it's just a very different atmosphere when gay people are involved, I think, anyway, which I think is really, really positive, you know. And they've opened it for the first time on a Friday. It generally opens on a Saturday and runs right through to a kind of Monday, but they've opened it on a Friday, and the first one was like a massive success, you know, completely sold out, and Berlin seemed to be really ready for this different kind of tempo and sound and stuff, you know. So, well,
it's interesting because the gay club element has been so important all the way through music history, from disco and to the Chicago clubs, to the kind of things that invented Chicago house, and then onwards throughout. And that's really interesting to hear that it's influential again, or instrumental again, in a completely new way.
Yeah. It's fascinating. You know, I mean, I've always gone to gay clubs throughout my life anyway, kind of thing. I've got no qualms with it, but to go somewhere like that and feel this kind of like, it's just this non-stop kind of party energy with people who are completely dedicated to putting on a special experience every weekend in, weekend out, you know. And you see people there that are like, you know, it doesn't matter what you do in the week, you know, you go to Berghain on the weekend, and it's just like, it's incredible. It's totally incredible. So yeah,
I think anything that kind of generates that sort of dedication is naturally going to end up being really interesting, because it's all that like totally obvious, like your grandma says, you reap what you sow, you get in from things what you put out. But in my experience, the scenes that, or the worlds that have ended up being most interesting are the ones where people really feel connected to it. It's theirs. They don't just want to go and consume, they want to go and create. It's not enough just to be passively absorbing it all. It's all about what you do with the goodness you get from it.
It's the dedicated ravers. It's kind of like you see the same people in there every time, and kind of like on a Sunday when it finally finishes, they set off fireworks as you leave the club. For the last kind of like sort of 100 or 150 people that have stayed to the bitter end kind of thing. Which is sort of like a nice little touch kind of thing. Just sort of like putting it to bed for another week and then see you next week kind of thing.
So that's out to the stamina crew and retire while we light the touch fire and set some rockets off.
Exactly, yeah.
So where do the fireworks go?
It's just kind of like this is outside the venue as you walk away, sort of like down the long kind of like avenue that leads up to it. It's a really sort of strikingly visual place anyway. And the way they've got it sort of designed on the inside is really incredible. Similar to here actually in the fact that it's kind of ex-industrial space that's been sort of done up, but with elements of the original architecture left. So like the insides are still kind of really grimy and stony, but then you've got really nice sort of couches and stuff in there, and kind of like you're not allowed to take photos in there because it kind of feels like they cheapen it, and it's just attention to detail basically.
That's an interesting thing actually, because a few places, DMZ in particular, although it's not strictly adhered to, do encourage that kind of no photography rule. What do you think that brings to club? I think just keeping your night special really, and I think it's good to just take home the memories that you've got in your head, like if people want to take photos, cool, but it's like you go to gigs these days and it's like everybody's got the phones up and the kind of like the flashes, and to me that's kind of off-putting, so like it's down somewhere like forward, it's like you're not there to sort of like take photos of the cool people, you're there to kind of dance, do you know what I mean? So it's kind of like, but that's interesting, isn't it, that whole idea of like documenting stuff inside your head rather than like relying on a bit of technology to document it for you. Although I have to say, every time I've ever tried to take a picture on my phone when I'm out at a club, all I get is like a black screen with a little bit of red in the corner. I've got about 100 of those pictures.
Totally.
Black, maybe a bit of blue. You've had to kind of like a long career on the dance floor, basically, as before your kind of your time as a producer. What do you think your time spent on the dance floor, almost like the graft of the dedicated, I don't like to use the word clubber because it seems somehow cheap, but music obsessive, whatever. What has that given you?
I think you just learn what works on a dance floor, or the kind of things that moved you, So, sometimes I think you can worry if people aren't dancing on a dance floor, say, but then you could get 20 people coming up to you afterwards and just saying, like, that was just amazing, and they were just zoning out, So I think it works both ways. People don't always have to be sort of like going mad on the dance floor to be having a really good night, but I think if you've been there and, like so many times down at, say, someone like Forward or DMZ, I've just kind of closed my eyes and been carried away completely, to like a different place, and that to me is what it's all about, basically, So if I can provide that for someone else, then that's like the job done, basically, So,
because there is another musical incarnation for you outside of the dance floor, isn't there? You were in a band for how long?
About 9 years, So yeah, all this time that I was kind of raving in London, I was playing bass in a band, which was like obviously very kind of separate thing in one way, but equally just totally immersed in music, basically, like just practicing every moment that we could, kind of thing, So, just being totally dedicated to what you do, kind of thing,
So what was the band and what did it sound like?
We were called the Monsoon Bassoon, which is sort of like one of the worst names ever. But we were very, very sort of complex, kind of progressive, mathematical, psychedelic rock music, really. So sort of deeply untrendy for many, many years. But we actually ended up sort of like getting to be slightly kind of darlings of the New Musical Express just for a very short time, which was a bit weird, having been completely kind of anti all that kind of thing for so long, sort of like, screw the mainstream press and screw NME and all this, and then when they start actually bigging you up, you're kind of like, actually, yeah, quite like this. Do you know what I mean? Like, so we got Single of the Week in there like 3 times in a row, which was completely bizarre, really. It didn't, it helped us become sort of popular for a while in terms of audience coming to gigs, but you know, we kind of put out our sevens and our albums and stuff, and you know, I'm really proud of that stuff. That was my life for a very long time. But when the band split up and the other guys had kind of built up their home studios and had things to do afterwards, I was kind of like left on my own basically, which was kind of like, oh, you know, all I can do is play the bass, and you know, like I'm kind of left sort of like not knowing what's going on. And that's when I decided to make a break and go to university and learn how to use computers and stuff, you know. So that completely changed like the direction of music making, kind of thing.
So during that period, it was basically like by day and early evening, I'm a bassist in a math rock band. By night and early morning, I'm a hardcore raver.
Yes,
having it to Two Bad Mice.
You know, I always wanted to try and combine the two, but it never really happened. Like the other people in the band weren't really feeling that kind of stuff, you know. So, and then equally now, I always thought that I'd try and bring my bass and that kind of influence into what I'm doing, but I haven't really found an appropriate way of doing it, you know. So, I mean, like, hopefully maybe this week I was hoping to try and jump on the bass and see if I can get involved in what some of these guys are doing and see if that might be fun.
You seem to be more about podcasts than like a weekly show in the style of someone like Scream.
Yeah. I mean, I was asked basically after doing just a few cover shows, as they call it, on Rinse, which is like, you know, the biggest pirate for this kind of music, who are currently trying to go legal kind of thing, you know. So did a couple of those, but because I'm based in Bristol, it's kind of hard for me to get up to the studio. So they were just like, well, look, why not do a pre-recorded thing and send it to us, and we'll kind of broadcast that late at night when there's no other people on air. And then, to be honest, there's so much, you know, just from the downloads, really. That's the kind of main thing, you know. So it doesn't matter who's locked in at, you know, 4 a.m. in London. You know that it's getting broadcast to everyone worldwide, and also, you know, it's there to download afterwards, kind of thing. So it goes out to a heck of a lot of people, kind of thing. So that's been really fun. But and something that I definitely really want to get more into is radio in general. You know, just spreading music to people. Basically, that's always been my sort of little thing, really. You know, so.
And it's a pretty broad selection you're spreading. I noticed on the track listing for some of them, like the Beach Boys, Feel Flows, some Black Dog. My mind's now gone blank, and I can't remember what else. But you know, like, it's not just music from the world you're involved in that you're playing, is it?
I just think perhaps that's one of the things that I've got that other people haven't. You know, some people might have fresher tunes, or some people might have something different in that way. But you know, I'm like just a music fan basically, who's been exposed to a lot of stuff through the work that I've done, and like, you know, I've been inspired by people playing me stuff. So I think if you can just chuck a few things out there that might get people thinking, you know, like, that's got to be a good thing, you know.
And then, so who else have you been doing podcasts for since that?
The main big one really was a site called Resonant Advisor, which is a renowned kind of techno and house website. It's a really good site, actually, really kind of easy to use, really interesting kind of feeds of news and information and kind of videos and reviews and everything. And they were fans of the label and stuff, and just randomly got in touch and asked me to do something. So I thought, because it's with for a house and techno based, you know, website, it'd be nice to do something that takes in both, you know, and the influences on dubstep that I have, you know, from the house and the techno worlds, you know. So it was cool to try and combine those two things, and people seem to really like it, and it's kind of opened a lot of people up from both scenes into different things, I think, you know, because certain people will download it for the dubstep and end up hearing this kind of like spacey kind of minimal stuff or whatever, and then a lot of people will be downloading it because it's got like a Radio Slave tune on it or a Shed tune, and they might hear something by Pinch or something that they really love, you know. So sort of trying to bring a few things together, you know.
And then obviously your link with Temper and Rinse and Ammunition is in deep, because you worked there for a long time. You've done the podcast, you did Volume 6 of Dubstep Allstars. How important is it having someone like Sarah Soldier at the helm, who seems more concerned about getting you to do what you want to do than necessarily filling up clubs to the maximum every week with the same people?
I mean, I think the whole thing with the All-Stars series was to do something sort of different each time, you know, that represented a little snapshot of whatever was going on. So, you know, like the first one was Hatcher, and obviously he was basically the only person playing it then, and the only person playing tunes by Scream and Benga and Horsepower and Genius or whoever, you know. And gradually going along, you know, it was amazing to be asked to do one, and I think it was simply that I was playing something a bit different, basically, which I think they saw as being relevant, you know, whether it was just little warm-up slots down at the club. You know, Sarah, obviously the boss of Temper and Forward, was feeling what she heard, and she was just like, maybe you should do the next All-Stars, which I nearly fell over when I heard it, and then spent about 6 months like banging my head against the wall trying to get this mix just right, kind of thing, you know. But it was just nice to be able to present tunes by people that I think are really, really talented to the world, kind of thing, you know. So maybe trying to introduce people like Peverlist and Pinch to a kind of like a wider audience or whatever, you know.
I think it's actually quite interesting how you specifically got to work with them, because obviously you knew them from out and about. Because again, I think from the outside, you always assume that people who work for an organisation, they all know each other. You never really think about the fact that people had to do things to get a job. You know what I mean? How did you start working for them?
I basically just used to randomly email their kind of generic email address, just through being a kind of nerdo kind of fanboy and kind of like wanting to kind of push the music to as many places and people that I could, kind of thing, because I was so passionate about the sound that no one really seemed to know about. So I was asking them to send things to certain magazines or to certain bloggers who were writing about certain stuff that I thought they might be interested in what Tempo were doing, and like I never got a response from these emails. I didn't even know if the email was actually working, kind of thing, you know. So it was just sort of like every now and again I'd send them one just in case, and then
hi, me again. I think you should send some records to Mixmag.
Yeah. In the end, like I just got like a kind of one-line email back, just sort of saying like, you know, what's your number, bruv, kind of thing, you know. And then randomly got a call out of the blue, just saying like, well, would you like to do something like this a bit more officially, you know? So yeah, just trying to help push the whole sound to a wider audience, basically.
Mm-hmm. And then so bringing things bang up to date with Apple Pips. Tell us, why did you start the label and what did you want to do with it?
Well, originally, I mean, it was before Skull Disco actually stopped, but you know, the whole point with Skull Disco originally was kind of just me and Shackleton's music, and then gradually little things started creeping up from around, because just naturally little collaborations would happen, or remixes, or people that we'd been inspired by, or, you know, whether it's Peverlist or Pole, or, you know, like all these things that we really love. But there's a lot of tunes that I was being given which I really think, you know, deserve to be out there, which wouldn't really have been suitable for Skull Disco, you know. So it made sense to start something new, you know, with a sort of different design aesthetic and a different sound, you know. So I mean, I was lucky enough to get introduced to a chap called Martin very early on, and play some of his tunes kind of for the first time. So the first thing that I signed was a Martin tune, or two Martin tunes, which did really well. And it's basically just trying to kind of just represent some different stuff from the fringes of whatever dubstep or techno or house or whatever. Just kind of interesting stuff. So there's stuff from T++ from Hardwax, and there's Ramadanman, and there's people from Bristol like Common as Muck and Gatekeeper, and you know, there's just so many good tunes around that it would be silly not to put them out, basically, you know. So yeah, so I'm struggling even to get those out, so I think I'm gonna have to start another couple of things as well and get them all rolling, you know, because there just seems to be a whole heap of interesting music that should be out there, really.
Well, I think this will be a great moment to have a listen to some of the stuff you're talking about.
Cool.
What do you suggest we listen to?
I could play you a little thing, which is the second release, which is in the shops now, which is a remix of the track that we heard earlier by me and Peverlist.
So you're talking about a different design aesthetic?
Yeah, just obviously wanted it to be very different looking to the Skull Disco stuff, but still have a really strong kind of design. So we went for something really kind of far out and quite hard to design. So the colours will go through many different shades of apples, basically. So you can get away with red and yellow and green and all sorts, you know. And then the inside kind of comes through like that. And the designer basically is the guy who designs Temper's sleeves, and always really, really wanted to work with him, got on with him really well, and he loves the music as well, kind of thing. So it was natural to sort of ask him to do something, and he absolutely smashed it. I'll play you a little thing. So this is a remix by a chap called Brendan Weller, which again, this came about just really naturally through chatting on MySpace and sort of saying, oh, I like your stuff, and oh, I like your stuff. And yeah, this is a remix of me and Peverlist by Brendan Weller. The thing that you know, you could pay anyone to do a remix of something and they can just like knock it out, but this was just something that happened kind of naturally, and he's used something that was previously kind of 140 beats per minute kind of dubstep or whatever, and recontextualized it into this kind of weird housey kind of thing, but really kept a lot of the original, which was, to me, was just fascinating hearing how he kind of did that, you know. So like really pleased to be, you know, and proud to be releasing something of that sort of quality by him, you know.
And how did that hookup happen?
Just randomly, literally through MySpace kind of thing. Just sort of hitting him up and saying I really like your stuff, and him getting back, and yeah, it's just kind of happened naturally. He did loads of mixes of it. He works. He's really prolific. He just kind of like sort of like sort of chat to him, give him a bit of feedback, and he'd be like, oh well, I'll do another one, and the next day there'd be another remix in the inbox waiting for you kind of thing. So there's another one that's actually going to be on. We're going to do a final roundup of Skull Disco, which this was kind of the first compilation of our first 5 releases on vinyl. We're going to do one last one, which is kind of 6 to 10 kind of thing, and then remixes, which have come about sort of quite nicely. Not things that we've sort of like, oh, we'll pay £1,000 to get this trendy person to sort of remix it. It's just more just people that we've met on our travels and have been interested in our sound and stuff, you know. So there's stuff by Geom, there's stuff by Pole, there's stuff by Peverlist, you know what I mean, you know. So yeah, that'll be the final missive from Skull Disco kind of thing.
I think we should put it out to you lot, but while you're marinating on your questions and getting them ready, do you wanna? Is there some kind of upfront exclusive forthcoming Apple Pips business you can?
This is just something interesting from T++, who I was talking about earlier, who obviously used to make, you know, before minimal was trendy, you know, kind of like minimal techno, when it was really just kind of stripped down techno music. But now he makes this kind of really strange, kind of almost breaky influenced, sort of dubstep influenced. I don't really know what it is, but I really like it kind of thing. So I'll play you that, which is going to be out soon on Apple Pips. Like Robert Henker, who is instrumental in writing a lot of stuff for Ableton, do you know what I mean? You know, so kind of like, yeah, twisting up these old things that they made with the analog things in this kind of digital, new kind of way. It's sort of quite interesting, I think.
And very much reflecting that in the title.
Yeah.
So who would like to ask Appleblim something? I'll tell you what, I think we just got a question from behind, and then he'll pass you the mic, if that's all right.
It's a kind of an open question, but how do you feel about the balance between the more abstract elements in dubstep and more and the you know, the dance obliged kind of like, how do you feel? Do you need like a lot of the to use the, you know, the pattern cliches and the rhythmic thing? Because I think like dubstep could go like further on without having to stick to this. You know, cliches on the rhythm.
I mean, my favourite stuff really getting made at the moment by even like by the big producers is stuff that's just rhythmically different, you know. So even someone like Scream or Benga, who might do some stuff that's a bit more rolling and a bit more regular, they can turn around and do these completely crazy sort of like jerky kind of things, which is like, that's what I love really, do you know what I mean? Because that's what I loved of the garage influence really, of being something that has swing and syncopation and kind of funk rather than kind of rigid kind of like beats, you know.
Any particular tunes that you're talking about then?
You know what?
Or is that
completely yeah, just because there's
blank off the top of your head?
Like,
sorry.
I get to see Scream a lot less often these days because he's always so busy playing all around the world and stuff like that. But I think there's a tune either called Callous or Thick, which are they're just completely bonkers, you know. And it's like it's really rhythmically sort of strange, you know. I love that stuff. Anything that's kind of got triplets involved in it or kind of like off-kilter rhythms is just sort of like, that's the stuff for me really. So
does that worry you? I mean, do you feel like in some sort of front line of that, like trying to push it further?
Yeah, I always try and do something a bit different, but you know, it's like getting protective of a sound. I think is kind of like, it's kind of strange really, because it's like, well, look, if you want to do what you want to do, just kind of do it, and some people are going to go with you and some people aren't, you know. So it's like, if there's a whole bunch of people that want to rave to a certain style of dubstep, then all good, do you know what I mean? You know, I might not be down the front getting into it, but you know, I just I'm just a bit less inspired by the sort of more kind of regular kind of rhythmic stuff. But.
Okay, so who's next?
Just about the remix, the one that was on Simple Records. You said there was another one related to Simple Records.
Like I could play a little bit of that as well if you like. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's basically just me and Ramadanman just making sort of some sort of house music really, which is going to come out on a label called Aus, which is
the other one.
Wilsall's other label, which both of those labels really inspired me over the last kind of year or two, basically, just in the design and the whole sound of it, you know, just this really kind of deep melodic kind of stuff, you know, and really interesting artists from like, you know, Prince Thomas to kind of like, who's one of my favourite DJs, to kind of like, you know, this Motor City Soul and stuff like that. But I could play you a little bit of this. Let's have a look.
Okay, who's next?
Is there some kind of explanation why this dubby music is coming from Kingdom?
From
Yeah.
UK, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, good question. I think it's just
Weather?
like, yeah, could be. I guess it's like, you know, hardcore, you know, started in England, you know, and then jungle started in England, and that was something that's kind of obviously couldn't really have happened, I don't think, anywhere else other than like London or whatever, you know, because of the influences of the bass music, you know, and dubstep kind of comes out of that really, you know. So yeah, I don't know why that would be, you know, other than it's an island with a lot of influences from a lot of different places, you know, with an immigrant tradition that I think we should be proud of. Do you know what I mean? You know, which is a shame why people seem to sort of be hating on that at the moment. You know, in England, you know, sort of asylum seekers and stuff like that. It's like, you know, we're a nation of immigrants, and that's why our music is so good, basically. You know, so I think it's something that should be sort of invested in rather than sort of like, yeah. I mean, obviously we all agree on that. Do you know what I mean? You know, but yeah, maybe that's got something to do with it as well. You know, island business.
Island business. I second that. Who's next?
Yeah, I'd like to hear a little bit more about your like influences, because you mentioned metalheads before, but like your sound and I guess the Bristol sound, in a sense, is much more like techno take on dubstep compared to like if I think about DMZ. That's when I hear like metalheads much more obvious. So just different things, I guess.
Yeah,
just expand on that. All right.
Yeah. I mean, coming from the southwest, I was massively influenced by like Aphex Twin, basically. You know, I was obsessed with him when I was a kid, kind of thing. You know,
I knew it.
You know, so and that leads you into stuff like Drexciya and all that kind of stuff, because Reflex were some of the first people to get turners onto that kind of stuff. You know, so going from there back to the Detroit stuff. You know, and then people like Orteka, you know, and Gezcom and stuff like that, and just, you know, like anyone who's into rave music has to be into like techno, surely, do you know what I mean, and house, you know, so it's kind of like it all just comes through, you know, whether it's like Beltram or, do you know what I mean, it's right up to Robert Hood or whatever, do you know what I mean, it's all out there, isn't it, you know, so that's just something that I've been passionate about for a long time, you know, and it happens that we can try and bring those influences in, you know. Do
you have a favourite Aphex Twin moment?
Oh, there's too many. Like, yeah, I was kind of stupidly obsessed with him, but...
Did you ever see him do his live thing with the teddy bears?
Yeah. Some deeply disturbing stuff. Performing from inside a Wendy house in Finsbury Park, stuff like that, you know. Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, man, how you going? Coming from Australia, I guess, you know, I got into the dubstep thing around the Allstars 1, and I remember it was just like... so amazing to hear that sound, and it took a while for it to kind of cotton on over there as far as the gigs and stuff, but so it must have been really amazing for you to be a part of that whole thing, or just at least to be able to witness it, you know, from the beginning. Yeah. But I was also going to say, just with regards to music and how long do you spend on a tune, you know, because you've got quite long progressive arrangements, so, you know, just... It
kind of varies, really. As you know, according to different things. I mean, I used to spend absolutely like ages and ages on mixdowns and stuff, you know, like sort of like just again and again and again trying to get it just right. But I actually kind of work a bit quicker these days, you know, and just kind of like, if it sounds good kind of thing, it is good, you know, and so it might be like a couple of days of ideas and then a couple of days of mixdown kind of thing, you know, try and kind of not labour too long on it and move on to more things and more inspiration and collaboration and stuff, you know.
So you've solved that problem that you posed at the very beginning of how you finish something.
Just walk away basically.
If it sounds good, it is good.
Yeah, definitely.
That sounds like quite a good mode to live by.
Okay, yeah. Listen to the man, definitely.
Frank Zappa says it sounds good, it is good. Listen to the man. So any other questions? Or is this time to say thank you very much to Appleblim? If you have any other questions, obviously just come up and ask the man. But it's been a really interesting 2 hours. We've had some really fantastic music.
Thanks very much for having me.
It's been a pleasure to spend some couch time with you. Thank you very much.
Big up.